In the small town of Willowbrook, there was a church called St. Mary's. People went there every Sunday to pray and listen to Father Joseph, a kind man with soft eyes and a calming voice. Everyone loved him because he always seemed to know the right things to say. But no one knew the secret he was hiding. It all began one rainy Thursday afternoon when a woman named Clara, who was married to a local baker, came to Father Joseph with a troubled look on her face. She was pregnant, and her husband didn't know. She told Father Joseph that she didn't know what to do. Father Joseph listened carefully, nodding slowly. He had helped many people before, but this time, the problem felt different. There was something strange in the air as Clara's confession echoed through the church. It was as if the walls themselves were listening. Clara wasn't the only one with a secret. A few weeks later, another woman, Emily, came to Father Joseph in tears. Emily's husband worked at the town's car shop. She, too, was pregnant and in the same difficult situation. Father Joseph couldn't believe it. 2 women, both pregnant, both from families in his congregation. How could this happen? What was going on? The tension in the air grew thick. Clara and Emily had never spoken to each other, but both had found comfort in Father Joseph. They began to visit him more often, each time alone, each time sharing more of their hearts with him. They felt safe with him, but they didn't know that Father Joseph was keeping a secret of his own. Days turned into weeks, and the church grew quieter, as if everyone knew something was wrong but no one could speak of it. People whispered, eyes darted, and rumors began to spread. Some said Father Joseph was a holy man, others started to wonder if he had lost his way. Father Joseph's struggle was intense. He had never planned for any of this. He had always tried to do what was right, but now he was caught in a web of lies. He felt trapped, as if he was walking on a thin rope high above the ground. One Sunday, during Mass, the storm hit. The entire town showed up, and everyone seemed to have a strange feeling in the pit of their stomachs. It was the day the truth would finally come out. Emily stood up in the middle of the church, her face pale. She pointed directly at Father Joseph, her voice shaking. "Father, you are the father of my child," she shouted. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at Father Joseph. He felt his heart stop. What could he say? How could he explain this? Before he could speak, Clara stood up too. "Father Joseph, you're the father of my child, too," she cried, her eyes filled with pain and anger. The congregation gasped. Whispers filled the air, and Father Joseph's face turned red with shame. He had never expected this moment to come. The truth was out, and the consequences were only just beginning. The church was filled with gasps and murmurs. The tension was so thick, it felt like you could cut it with a knife. Father Joseph stood frozen, his heart racing. How could this happen? How could he be caught in such a mess? Clara and Emily, both shaking with emotion, stared at him. Their faces were filled with a mix of anger, hurt, and confusion. The people in the pews whispered to each other, some shaking their heads, others trying to make sense of the situation. Father Joseph's mind raced. He wanted to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. All he could hear was the pounding of his heart in his chest. How had it all gone so wrong? He looked around the room, seeing the faces of the people he had served for so many years. People who trusted him, people who looked to him for guidance. And now, all of them were looking at him with disbelief. Father Joseph began, but his voice cracked. He swallowed hard. "I never meant for this to happen." But Emily wasn't having it. "You lied to us," she said, her voice rising. "You told us we could trust you. And now look at us. We are both carrying your children, and you never told us the truth." Clara stepped forward, her hands shaking. "How could you do this? You were supposed to help us, not hurt us." Father Joseph's eyes filled with tears. He had failed them both, and now he had failed the entire town. How could he face them all? How could he face himself? The room was eerily silent, except for the occasional sob or whispered comment. Father Joseph felt the weight of their stares on him, crushing him. He wanted to run, to hide, but he knew he couldn't. Not now. He took a deep breath and finally found his voice. I am sorry. I am so sorry for everything. I have failed you, and I have failed all of you. But please, understand, this was not what I ever intended. I made a terrible mistake, and now I have to live with it. There was no easy way out. There were no simple answers. Father Joseph had to face the consequences of his actions, no matter how hard they were. Later that afternoon, Father Joseph sat in the back room of the church, his hands resting on his lap. The door creaked open, and in walked Emily. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was something different in her expression now. Something softer. I don't know what to say, she began, her voice quiet. I wanted to hate you. I wanted to be angry and never speak to you again. But I don't know. I don't know. Father Joseph looked up at her, his heart heavy. I understand. I don't expect forgiveness. Not after what I've done. Emily shook her head. It's not about forgiveness. It's about understanding. About what happens next. Father Joseph sighed. I don't know what happens next. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to fix anything. The silence between them stretched for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Emily spoke again, her voice soft but firm. We need to figure this out together. We need to talk to our husbands. We need to tell them everything. Father Joseph nodded slowly. I don't know if I can. I don't know how to tell them what I've done. Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. You have to. For all of our sakes. The days that followed were a blur. Father Joseph found himself talking to Clara and Emily more often, trying to figure out how to repair the damage he had done. But it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about everyone who had trusted him, everyone who had looked to him for guidance. Each day felt heavier than the last. Father Joseph began to wonder if he would ever be able to live with himself. The guilt gnawed at him, a constant reminder of his mistakes. Then came the hardest part, talking to their husbands. It was one thing to face the women he had betrayed, but it was something else entirely to face their families, the men who had trusted him. Clara's husband, Thomas, was the first one to confront Father Joseph. The look in his eyes was a mixture of pain and disbelief. How could you do this? Thomas asked, his voice low and full of hurt. You were supposed to be a man of God. How could you betray me like this? Father Joseph couldn't answer him. All he could do was look down at his hands, ashamed. He had no excuses. There was no way to undo the hurt he had caused. I am so sorry, Father Joseph said, his voice barely a whisper. I never meant for any of this to happen. But Thomas didn't want to hear his apologies. He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the church floor. Next, it was Emily's husband, Mark. He was angry, pacing back and forth as he shouted at Father Joseph. You ruined everything. My family, our family, will never be the same because of you. Father Joseph tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. There was nothing he could say to make things right. Nothing could undo what had already been done. The townspeople started to hear the whispers, the rumors, the stories of what had happened. Some people were angry, others were sad, and still others were confused. But all of them were hurt. Hurt by the man they had once trusted. Father Joseph had to make a choice. He could run away, leave Willowbrook behind and never return. Or he could stay and try to rebuild what he had broken. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't ever be the same. He had to face the consequences of his actions, no matter how painful it was. Father Joseph sat alone in the church, his hands trembling as he prayed for the strength to face what was to come. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. The town of Willowbrook would remember this day forever. And so would he. Days turned into weeks, and Father Joseph's guilt continued to weigh on him. He couldn't escape it, no matter how hard he tried. The town that had once embraced him now seemed distant, almost as if he were invisible. People looked away when he passed by, whispers followed him wherever he went. The burden of his mistakes felt heavier with each passing day. One evening, as the sun began to set, Father Joseph sat in his study, staring at the warm pages of the Bible before him. It had always been his guide, his source of strength. But now, it seemed so far out of reach. He didn't know how to move forward. Then, there was a knock at the door. Father Joseph stood up slowly and opened the door to find Clara standing there. She looked different, not angry, but tired. She hadn't visited him in days, and he wondered if she had come to say goodbye. "Father Joseph," she said softly, "I wanted to talk." He stepped aside, allowing her into the room. She didn't sit down, instead standing by the window, gazing out at the quiet town. The last time they spoke, the air had been filled with anger and hurt. But now, it was strangely calm. "I've been thinking a lot," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About what happened, about everything. I've spent so much time being angry at you, but I think I need to let it go." Father Joseph's heart skipped a beat. He looked up at her, confused. "Let it go?" Clara nodded. "I can't carry this anger forever. It's eating me up inside. And I don't think it's helping anyone. Not you, not me, not our families." He stared at her in disbelief. Was she really forgiving him? "I'm not saying everything's okay," she continued, "because it's not. But I've realized that holding on to this anger only makes it worse. And I need to focus on my family now. I need to heal." Father Joseph felt a tear slip down his cheek. He didn't deserve her forgiveness, but he was grateful. So grateful that words failed him. "Thank you," he finally managed to say, his voice cracking. Clara smiled faintly. "I don't know what will happen next, but I think we all need to find peace. For the sake of our families, for the sake of our children." The next day, Father Joseph went to Emily's house. He hadn't seen her in weeks, but he knew he had to try. He had to ask for her forgiveness, too. Emily answered the door, her face still weary but softer than before. Without a word, she stepped aside, letting him in. "I've been thinking about what Clara said," Emily began, sitting down across from him. I think I understand now." Father Joseph was stunned. Was she about to forgive him too? "I was angry, yes," Emily continued, "but I realized that anger is just going to make everything worse. I don't want to spend the rest of my life hating you. I need to move forward, for my family." Tears welled up in Father Joseph's eyes again. He had caused so much pain, and yet here they were, both of them showing him kindness he didn't deserve. "I'm so sorry," Father Joseph whispered. "I failed you both. I carry this guilt for the rest of my life, but I'll do my best to make things right. I promise." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I believe you. But you have to forgive yourself too." Father Joseph looked down at his hands. Forgiving himself felt impossible, but Emily's words stuck with him. Maybe, just maybe, he could start to heal, just as Clara had said. In the weeks that followed, Father Joseph worked tirelessly to rebuild what he had broken. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but he was determined. He met with the town's leaders, asked for forgiveness from those he had hurt, and worked to regain their trust. Some people still couldn't look at him without feeling betrayed, and some refused to come back to church. But others, more and more, began to forgive. They saw the effort he was putting in, the sincere regret in his heart, and slowly, they began to heal alongside him. Father Joseph also spent more time with Clara and Emily, trying to be there for them in whatever way he could. They weren't close friends, he knew that, but they were slowly learning to find a sense of peace with the situation. They all knew it would take time, but they were willing to try. The day came when Father Joseph stood at the pulpit once more, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. His voice was steady, but the emotion behind it was raw. I have made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. And I've hurt many people, he began, looking out at the congregation. But I stand before you today asking for your forgiveness. I can't change what I've done, but I can try to make amends. And I can promise that I will work every day to be better, to do better. He paused, his eyes searching the faces before him. I hope, with time, we can all heal. I hope we can all find peace. There was a long silence. Then, one by one, people began to stand. At first, it was just a few, but soon, nearly everyone in the congregation was on their feet, clapping, showing their support. Father Joseph couldn't believe it. They were giving him a second chance. The town of Willowbrook didn't forget what had happened. The rumors, the pain, the hurt, it would always be a part of their story. But as time passed, they learned to live with it. They learned to forgive, and they learned that even the most broken things could be healed with time, effort, and understanding. Father Joseph, too, began to heal. He never forgot what had happened, but he learned to forgive himself. He knew that his journey would be long, but as he stood in his church, surrounded by people who had chosen to give him a second chance, he finally understood what it meant to start over. And for the first time in a long time, Father Joseph felt peace.